for checking out the Littrell Show, building businesses, bars, and brands. Before I get into my next guest, I just wanted to shout out that I recorded this episode about 2 weeks ago, and had I known what was going to happen 2 weeks later, I would have definitely asked a few different questions. But the indomitable, the incredible, the amazing, bright, shining beacon of intelligent light that is Chris Lowder gave an extraordinary interview on the Movers and Shakers podcast. So I wanted to make sure that we gave plenty of time for people to consume that, because it's a very important interview between April Wachtel, Chris Lowder, and Micaela Piccolo. So definitely go to the Movers and Shakers podcast. Definitely check that out. But I'm actually really glad that we got into some of the subjects that Chris and I talked about, because that is also important. What's going to happen at the other side of this, and what's happening with eco spirits is super, super avant-garde for the industry. So without much more delay, please welcome Mr. Chris Lowder. Thank you for joining me on the show. And how are you doing, Chris?
All right, man. It's been first of all, thanks for having me. This is really exciting. It's good to connect with you. It's been way too long.
Forever.
Yes, way too long. I think the last time I saw you, we were doing Amaro Montenegro B Squad.
B team, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the B team. Yeah, that feels like 150 years ago.
That was actually 150 years ago.
Yeah, but you look the same. I feel older, and I have a kid now, so I don't know what happened.
Actually, I'm much older. Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy start to 2020, as you know. So
yeah.
I was just thinking about that. I'm not emotionally older at all. It's pretty crazy start to 2020. So we're dealing with the coronavirus world. I know that the States is just starting to deal with what Asia's been in for the last 8 or 9 weeks. So it is what it is, but that's what brings me here in Singapore for a couple weeks. And then I'm going back to China tomorrow. So I'll be right in the thick of it. But I don't know, it's good. So far, so good. It's been a weird start to the year, but I'm pretty optimistic for what happens from March or April onwards. So it'll be okay.
So, so you're basically sequestered. Can you get out at all? Can you leave? In
Singapore, it's totally fine. You would walk around and not know that anything was unusual. The government here is pretty awesome, and they've taken early tight control of the situation. They've done all the contact tracing. They have a lot of influence over the newspapers and radios and things. And that's really good in this case, because it keeps everyone calm. It keeps everybody on the same page. They stopped hoarding of supplies. And it was kind of weird for a week or so as people were wearing masks and not really sure what to do. And then things went back to normal pretty quickly. People have a whole lot of elasticity in their tolerance for these kinds of things if it stops them from doing the things that they usually like to do. So as soon as things seem like they're more or less okay or can be justified as being okay, people are right back to it. We saw that in SARS also. Some of our partners in China especially, who have been in this game, the booze distribution game, for 20, 30 years, will tell you in SARS, it was the same situation of things hit a hard decline. It's nothing as long as people are really nervous, but then as soon as people have some reason to go back to business as usual, they immediately do. So that's what gives me big hope. But in China, I'm going to go back and do 14 days quarantine. That's mandatory. And then anytime you change cities, it's mandatory. So I'll be just sitting in Shanghai for a while, because I will not want to repeat 14 days holed up in a hotel room. 14 days when I first came to Singapore also. And that'll be okay. Things are slowly starting to reawaken. Bars can apply to reopen from this Monday, and that will start next Monday when the applications are granted. Then it will be, people are allowed back into their bars with temperature controls and crowd control measures in place. So no more than X number of people in any room at any given time, and a lot of social distancing, and no more than two to a table at a restaurant, or no more than X number of tables at one time, all this kind of thing. How effective that is, I don't really know, but that is what it is. So we'll just kind of ride through it.
That's so crazy. I can't even wrap my mind around it. One thing that I think that we just don't really understand, that you explained to me one time, we were at dinner and you were telling me just kind of the density difference between cities in China and Asia in general are wildly different. China is the most populous place in the world. It's 1.3 billion people and growing at 34 babies a minute. I had to look that up. That's a lot.
And
that's a lot of babies.
That's the documented people. So there's some other academic thinking that it's somewhere like 1.5, even when you measure like migrant workers and things that don't have a registered address and people that are born. There's whole story. I mean, I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole here, but there's whole stories of people who were born outside of one child policy when that was still a thing. And so they're alive, but they're not in the government system. And in China, if you're not like a registered, everyone gets it's almost like a passport that you get. So each citizen has a number. If you don't have this number, like you can't go to school, you can't get married, you can't participate in anything in the system, and everything is in the system. So it's these people that are alive in China that are just non-participants in society. It's really, really weird. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but that is another thing. So there's a lot of people, yes.
It's like Idiocracy in Unscannable. They're like, unscannable. You don't have that tattoo. Yeah.
That's exactly what do I do with you? Same story.
That's a lot of humanity. Well, I'm just curious. I mean, you were telling me the story one time about how just the staggering volume, like people drink. Yes. People drink all over the world, obviously, but it's a little bit different because, I mean, New York is around, I think 10 million people or something like that. But that's like a top 5, top 10 city in China.
Yeah.
And like the density volume and like the way people drink is way different. I mean, like the prevalence of public transportation and shared transportation, like bikes. You were telling me about the bikes. There's just big heaps of bikes that people just share. Is that still a thing? I mean, last time we spoke was like a couple of years ago, but
it's still a relevant question because things do transform so quickly in China. So some of the bike companies have since failed, but more have inevitably popped up. So what happens? Another crazy question is what happens to bikes from a now irrelevant biking platform that are no longer useful? That's a whole different story. There's pictures of like elephant graveyards of just dead bicycles that are waiting to be scrapped, but it's like whole airports worth of just bikes that are sitting there in piles. Pretty crazy. But
what a bizarre world. What a bizarre world.
So I'm trying to even think of a science fiction metaphor here, but it's escaping me. But so we're living on the Bubbles film so we don't see the big huge elephant graveyards of dead bicycles. What we do see is rows and rows and rows and rows of bikes that you can just grab at any time, and you scan them with your phone. Immediately it's logged into your banking. Nowadays, actually, it will text you your calorie count. So like as you're biking around, there's a dream in the States of what would happen if we could get all of this stuff to talk to each other, the Internet of Things, or, what will happen when blockchain gets to a certain size of scale. It's kind of already that way in China because all of the apps are necessarily integrated, and QRC technology is so prevalent that it functionally is like blockchain light is a way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And where it's less permanent, but it functionally serves the same function. Anyway, so you scan the bicycle automatically is deducted from your bank account, the nickel or whatever it costs.
Right.
Biking around, that goes straight into your Maps app. It's logging your calories that go into your health app, and you can if you're a data guy, and I know you and I are pretty big nerds when it comes to this stuff, you can go down a very deep tunnel of thinking about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about it. It's like in the US, we would have a lot of, and pardon my ignorance here, but I don't know how it actually works there in kind of I don't know what the correct word is even. It's the People's Republic of China. So it's like, It's a government of the people, and it's there's the party that controls, there's the only party that controls kind of what happens.
Yes.
And so there's no pesky, consumer protection groups, and there's no
Well, I mean, it's yes and no. So China gets a lot of hard knocks, especially in the West, because they like to throw around the communist term. If, having studied it formally, I can say that what it's usually referred to is communism with Chinese characteristics. What does that mean? No one really knows. It's not a very transparent system in terms of people actually understanding the way that the whole government works. But one thing that's really interesting is that the mandate that they have, without turning this into a political podcast, is prosperity for the people, well-being of the people. So there's actually heavily enforced consumer protections. The government is very paranoid about going down some road in which people can point to the government and say, you are the only option we have, and you have led us down this road where we're eating lead paint, or, there's some other issue. So I find that compared to, I'm going to get angry email, but compared to some Western counterparts in which you have a lot of corporate interest lobbying and a lot of things can be bought in terms of regulation or in terms of regulatory direction, you actually don't have those pressures so much in China. Obviously, there's other problems, but when it comes to consumer protection and general prosperity and decisions being made for the well-being of individual humans, they get a pretty good deal.
I believe that. And the reason I'm asking about this stuff and not about drink stuff right now is because we can't really trust the news right now. I mean, we have privatized news, and it just in this period in the election cycle, they tell us what we need to be afraid of.
I tell you what's funny is I left the States in 2000 and I want to say 14 sounds correct. So it's been six and a half years now. And so the last time I lived in the United States, we were under an Obama presidency. So I've missed the whole journey ever since. Not to say that that's like a better or worse time, but watching social media, all of my American friends, the way, just the tone, I've seen it from overseas slowly but surely just become more upset and bitter. And obviously part of that is due to politics. Obviously part of that is due to general frustration at the system that you're talking about. And part of that is due, I think, to this meta conversation about the slow awakening and realization that we've given so much of our power to Silicon Valley and to people who are buying and selling and trading our data and echo chambers and fake news. Like, all this stuff has happened in the last 6 years, and I've watched it all from overseas. And I'm struck by, when I do come back to visit, how much all people can talk about is politics and this meta discussion about the existential crisis of data management and privacy and things. Like, people just don't talk about that over here. I mean, they do in like Hong Kong and Singapore, maybe because there's similar, not the same media structure, but it's heavily influenced by the West. But I don't know, it's less of an issue in other places, which is just weird for me to come back and be saturated in it all.
Yeah, well, one thing that I've been actively trying to avoid, which I was like totally addicted to, was fucking TikTok.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Like, whoa. TikTok is just like, it has the same shit that makes you addicted to slot machines. You're like, whoa.
This is a Chinese invention. So
yeah. No. And there's like a lot of like, it's kind of shrouded in some mystery too. Okay. So onto the drinks business. So somebody felt it was a good idea to put you in charge of all the Proof & Co business in China. And you're a young man. How old are you?
31.
You're 31. Okay. That seems like a huge responsibility. And I'm just trying to, like, in anticipation of our conversation, I was kind of trying to reverse engineer that and decode that and like see how that would be possible, because typically, you're a young guy for this job. I mean, and it's a big job. And aside from the fact that you speak Mandarin and also Japanese, that is a huge job for any native in that. And Proof is a new company in a new place delivering new products. So these are a lot of new things. So I'm just curious, how did this come to be and how's it going?
Sure. Well, I'd say the beginning was organic. So originally, when I first began working with Proof & Company, it was to do, it was actually on the client side, I guess I would say. So I joined Four Seasons Hotels, who was opening a new hotel in Seoul, South Korea. And I wanted to come back to Asia for a lot of different reasons. And I had reached out to Proof. I heard that they were the people in Asia to know if you want to get into the serious beverage business. And so I reached out to their creative director, Jason Williams, who's this awesome guy from Australia, used to similarly be in charge of huge groups, a group called the Keystone Group, doing just lots and lots and lots of high volume beverage across many accounts. So anyway, I joined through Four Seasons. That was 13 outlets in that hotel. So escalating my management role from the Nomad, which was also high volume, but was less complex in some ways because there was it was much easier, of course, culturally to deal with New Yorkers as someone who had lived and dealt there, as opposed to bringing this culture to Korea. So that was a huge challenge, and did that for a year and a half. And at the end of that time, I was talking to Proof and saying, look, Micaela and I are thinking about this next step in our lives. It's not going to be in Korea, again, for a number of reasons. And just thinking about what comes next. And they said, well, don't say anything else. We have this idea to open an office in mainland China. And we've been working with you for the last year and a half in Seoul. We feel like you should come and join the team. At that time, I was not running the show by any means. It was myself and a guy named Ethan, who were basically placed in as a proofing company, I guess module might be the right way to say it, on top of an existing distribution business that mostly focused on wine. So we brought in our spirits know-how and our consulting skills and our knowledge of products and some appetite for salesmanship, and then started selling spirits into this existing distribution company, into their client base. We would open our own, bar accounts and things like that. But mostly doing not sales at that time. At least I wasn't really thinking of it so much as sales, but doing a lot more consulting, a lot more software development for bars. So looking at beverage lists, staff training, menus, and then through that can leverage maybe some group contracts and things for distribution. So going to a hotel group and saying, I'll come and do your menus and things if you're willing to commit to such and such product placement or whatever. So that's what we did, and built that business to a point where more and more, and this is very relevant for our discussion about what is it like the journey from being a bartender to being this other thing. I would say one of the biggest challenges and transformations that happened in that first year was mentally and emotionally going through the journey of seeing myself from bar manager to creative consultant, to realizing that if I don't learn this management stuff, if I'm not functional to read a P&L, if I don't have a grip on the finances of this business that we're running, no one else is doing it. I mean, that's not true. It's not that no one was driving the car. Our CEO, who's amazing, this guy named Paul, who's my mentor on this business side, he has been amazing. And he was GMing the company remotely from Singapore, and he would stop by once a month and we'd go through everything. And we also had a local GM who was on the wine distributor company. So there were people driving the car, but one of the things that I realized is that, well, gosh, this spirits business is really growing. It's really taking off. At a certain point, I can see a future in which maybe it is its own independent thing. Probably the CEO of the company is not going to GM it forever. And I already understand a lot of the ins and outs of how this business is running. So yeah, why not just see myself as this and just learn the pieces that would be necessary, the competencies needed to actually do that. One of the best pieces of advice I think I've ever been given in my career came from Dunley, which is not surprising. He's a very insightful and intelligent guy.
No doubt.
And it was when I was doing the CAP program at Tales of the Cocktail. and he did one of these CAP seminars and said, I think it was like the first day, he said to everyone that what you'll be defined by in your career is not the things that you do well or exceptionally well, but the things that you don't know how to do and the things that you do poorly. Fuck, that is the best advice anyone can ever give anyone. I have ruminated on that little nugget of wisdom for years and continue to find new facets of wisdom within that wisdom, where really the negative space, the contours are what define you. It's not. So how do I translate what I just said to a bartender? So if you're the head bartender of a bar, or you're coming up as a bartender, you have a certain amount of time in the day with which to improve your craft. Now, obviously, you need to become a great craftsman. So there's a lot of things that are just required of you. They're expected. It is not a nice to have, it is a must have, right? So you need to know the basic recipes, you need to know round building, you need to know great customer care, like work on that first, obviously. But once you get to a certain, you're like 80% of the way there, you're to mastering it 100%, right? You're hitting really diminishing returns. Like you're only gonna, like at a certain time, it's not going to pay off anymore to work on your meniscus of your jigger. It's not going to pay off anymore to more quickly measure a quarter ounce. Like the guest just doesn't give a shit. The other bartenders don't give a shit. It's not going to serve you in a meaningful way. The difference between like a 95% of the way cocktail and a 98% of the way cocktail is like 6 years of work. And probably no one knows the difference the majority of the time. So rather than spending time perfecting your orgeat recipe to the 15th iteration, learn Excel or learn how to do a P&L or learn how, just look at your your professional competencies. And instead of saying, what do I do pretty well that I want to do spectacularly well because it makes me comfortable, because making cocktails is in my comfort zone. Like it doesn't matter if you can name what distillery made all of the bourbon on your back bar. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't.
I can like think of a couple people that really need to hear this see you say it.
Me too. That's why I'm happy to say it. It just doesn't matter. For 99.9% of people, like maybe there's one person who it really is going to spin off and write the bourbon blog, or has some bourbon aficionado who's sitting at their bar. But honestly, even then, that information's not relevant, because as a bartender, you're probably better served if you're just listening and asking questions rather than just talking about your own knowledge. So, but that's neither here nor there. So but this stuff isn't relevant. What will actually transform your life and your future and your career is if you have a very uncomfortable period of introspection in which you think to yourself, what is it that I don't do well or don't know how to do? Or when I look at the financials of my bar, it doesn't make sense. Or if my piping breaks, do I know how to fix it? Like all of these things that may be the same amount of work that would take your cocktail from 95 to 98%, you could go from 0% to, I don't know, 30, 40% literate in reading your bar's financials, or applying for a loan, or talking to an interior designer, or understanding sound systems and lighting. Like these things that actually you can sit there and do with the same amount of time and effort will make you a dramatically more valuable consultant, employee, manager, owner of a business, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, did you have so when you released the documents from the Bar Collective, I mean, you had codified and succinctly put together these documents, and you just said, here, world, it's yours. Was this wisdom from 14 days of of quarantine in Shanghai or soon to be Singapore, where like you didn't have that then. Like, what was the logic behind it then? Because you did that 6-8 years ago, right?
Yes, I have always, there's what to say here. A little bit of, so what you're referring to is the Bar Collective, so a Google Drive that I had put together. Chris Elford helped as well. We had gone to this Portland Cocktail Week and went to a bunch of seminars. And this was back in like 2014 or 2013 or 2012 or something. We went to all these seminars and we did different tracks. So there's different major tracks at this Cocktail Week. So you can learn creative consulting, or you can learn entrepreneurship, or you can learn like bartending and like the craft of a cocktail and things like this. And so we went through and studied different tracks, and at the very end talked to each other and said, man, I've got all of this interesting information, and I wish that I also had the interesting information that you had. Why don't we just set up this Google Drive and just share to one another this information? And then, I don't know, you kind of think on that. And one of the things that I really believe is that education should be free. In most cases, education is free. Situations in which education costs money, and usually that's an investment in yourself and your career. But most stuff that you would care to learn out there in the world, you can learn for free if you dig it out. So if you did some intense Googling, if you went on Pirate Bay, if you wrote to people, I think the quote from Good Will Hunting is, it's an education you can get for $5 worth of late charges at the
public library. Yeah.
You can get a Harvard education, which is true. So that cloud drive for me was just us saying, or maybe me saying, I don't want to speak for Chris Elford, but just me saying that all of this stuff you could get for free anyway. I am doing actually neither a service nor a harm by hosting it, because it's all out there. Mm-hmm. If any of you attendees in this cocktail week were to talk to one another, you could also just get this information. I'm not saying that they're right or wrong for not doing that, or even that they did it or didn't do it, but all of this is available. So then I started extrapolating upon that fact, I think, is to say, well, I've been asking different friends of mine who run different bar programs for years. Hey, can you send me your spec list? Do you have any book PDFs or anything that's very interesting that you think that I should learn? And inevitably, people have their little treasure trove, right? And they'll share it with you openly. So all I have done by hosting this stuff on a Google Drive, or later when I released a list of the 178 recipes that every bartender needs to know, all that is taking something that's already underground, secretly shared, and just putting it in one visible, permanent location, which in my opinion is not, like I say, neither a harm nor a service, because it's all out there anyway. I can look like a really good guy by putting it up online, but it's not even so Machiavellian, the reason to do that. Like, I'm just happy to share things that I feel like I've been lucky enough to have a network that has shared them with me. I didn't pay for any of that knowledge. I don't think most people or anyone has ever paid for that kind of knowledge.
No.
So just put it on and let people just work with it.
I remember, I think that there are still a lot of people out there that actually really covet their own service manuals as being like a component of a sale, of a transaction for consulting services. And I don't really understand that, because first of all, who's going to sit there and read through a 30-page document, like a 50-page document at a bar?
Literally not even the employees.
But definitely, like, it's specifically not the employees. Like, I've seen Nomads, and it's a delightful read, and I've seen like some other. To somebody who grew up in like kind of blue collary bars, it's just like, wow, this is extraordinarily thoughtful. Like, they really picked out their tea very conscientiously.
I will qualify my statement just now of saying it is a deeply thoughtful, useful, and interesting document that you have to read parts of and you are quizzed on parts of during your training. So some of it is enforced. However, it is meaningless without the actual culture of the bar and restaurant that reinforces it. And that is in many ways more important than the document itself. So the document is nothing without the hard work to learn it. The hard work is nothing without the smart hiring of finding the people who will do point one and point two. And the smart hiring is nothing without the constant reinforcement of the culture that does point one, point two, and point three. And so to your point, the service manuals of being something that is saleable doesn't make any sense to me. It is like I said earlier about recipes, it's a must-have. If you're consulting on my bar, you should have a bar manual or a service manual or the Excel template for par maintenance in my refrigerators or a template for doing ordering or whatever. Like all of this, I'm expecting that you're going to fulfill to me if I pay you money to consult on my menu. So again, if you don't have these things, or if you're not comfortable doing the ordering in a bar or doing management training or whatever, if you don't know how to build a restaurant culture, then you don't have a business in consulting anyway. So the first thing I say this, my audience, when I say this sentence, is the bartender who thinks they're very good at writing recipes and therefore they should be a bar consultant. That's not
what percentage of that is actually consulting in a bar? Like, is writing a menu?
Writing the menu, you can, I mean, frankly, the menus that are appropriate for most venues, you can write like while you're having your morning oatmeal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is if you're really that good. And that's not me saying that you should phone it in, but that's me saying that the reason that people go to bars isn't because of the cocktails. The reason that people go to cocktail bars isn't because of the cocktails. Cocktails are an object around which we gather arbitrarily. Again, Good Will Hunting reference is we could get together and just eat a bunch of caramels or have a cup of coffee or have a cocktail or whatever.
Did you like watch that at 5 o'clock this morning? Because it's 8 o'clock your time. It's 9 o'clock my time. It seems to be very top of mind for you.
This movie is always very top of mind for me. I relate very much to angry Mr. Will Hunting. But so yeah, this is an arbitrary social convention, and it's fascinating. Don't get me wrong. I love cocktails. I love the craft of the cocktails. I love bar culture. But I'm also willing to say to myself that that's really not why most people come to a bar. More often than not, they come to a bar these days to photograph themselves having cocktails and not actually have the cocktails, which is even more so in China. Like a lot of this culture, this selfie culture and food photography culture comes from Asia. I remember when I first moved to Japan in 2008 and I wrote home, like, you'd never believe this, but everyone here takes pictures of their own food and puts it on the internet. And like my family thought that was the weirdest thing they'd ever heard of. That was before Facebook. Before Facebook came to Japan, they had a thing called Mixi. And that's all anyone would do is they would take pictures of their own food and put it online. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then, of course,
and then they would eat it though, right?
Yeah. Then they would eat it. But in China, they don't necessarily eat it anymore. I'm sure it's more and more the same thing in the States, as people are just buying objects to photograph. And if that's not happening there yet, you can mark my words that it will, because a lot of this culture comes from Asia, if only because Asia in a lot of ways has less pretenses about technology and the way in which we interact with it in our lives. And more the technology is more advanced than what we have in the West. In China, it's definitely true. And so you can actually peek into the future. Like, once the West is okay with A, they'll probably be okay with B. Once they acclimate to B, they'll probably be okay with C. And in China, they're already at F and G. So what you see in China now is a lot of younger kids, like, they don't even really like to drink alcohol so much. The kids that are going to cocktail bars, they are mostly asking for low ABV or non-alcoholic drinks. Part of that is obviously because of an allergy that people have very often in Asia to alcohol, the red face and the very quick to be drunk kind of thing. But this is also just because the value that people get from bars is changing, and very quickly. And when you or when I first started drinking, it was way more experiential. It was way more social bonding. We're going to do a bunch of shots and get drunk and hang out and, like lose control a little bit. And this is the value that we got out of it was internally experiential. And the social affirmation that we were getting was from one another in the bar who were sharing that space. But the social affirmation that young people are getting from going out and going to bars is an external affirmation, right? It happens online. So they are less and less even interested in engaging with alcohol and being drunk because they're not seeing the experiential value of being drunk. I mean, they are a little bit, and like, I'm going to get a little buzzed and we'll relax and have a good time. Obviously, kids are still getting hammered, but this is a different bit of the culture. This is a different bit of social strata. So there's still people that are like going to KTVs and getting hammered and going to the clubs and drinking a bunch of champagne and getting hammered, and like that still happens. But I'm specifically talking about the value that people get from spending $15, $18, $19 on a cocktail has less and less to do with the experience of getting drunk and more to do with the experience of taking a really nice photograph in a beautiful room of themselves with a great looking drink that is well garnished and attractive, and posting that online so that people can see that that's the kind of lifestyle that they live. And increasingly, these things are getting farther away from each other. Like people aren't going to the bar in China necessarily to experience a new gin or to try that bartender's recipe. It makes it even less about the bartender, which means it's even more relevant to do all this other stuff that I've been talking about on this call, like expanding your competencies. But the kids who are going to the bar are like, it's less and less about your recipe and more about the ambiance, photogenic lifestyle ambiance that you can create and the moments that you can create that we can capture on film and share to one another and have people ask us like, wow, where are you? I haven't seen this place. And that's what gives you social value. That's really interesting to me anyway. This is fascinating. And it's the future. And so you can either like learn about it and master that, or keep worrying about your 10 ml or quarter ounce pour, or, you know what I mean? It's just less relevant.
Or who's going to be the next president. I mean, it's just like, there's certain things that we can control. And, that is just like absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
Like how people consume. I mean, like there's definitely a trend towards low ABV and no ABV cocktails in the US. And that's kind of where people are headed. And ironically, there's like a large, you guys just released a large format distribution vessel, right? It's like a 3 liter. That is super exciting. And you're going to take that back and refill it, right?
So I'll talk about this a little bit. So we have innovation in Asia. This is the first of its kind in the world that we believe. It's called Eco Spirits. And what we have done, traditionally, the way that alcohol is distributed is if you are a vodka distillery in Sweden, for example, you are buying in bulk contracts, flat pack cardboard, glass bottles, aluminum caps, stickers, whatever. Probably they're produced in China. The bottles sometimes are produced in Eastern Europe, but it depends on your supply chain and your contract. And that bottle will go all the way from China past Singapore, all the way down around the world to Sweden. So that's a huge cost. That's shipping, that's production, that's whatever. And there's a huge carbon cost on top of that. Like when you really stop and think about the carbon impact of a single bottle of spirits, it's pretty irresponsible. It's pretty staggering. And then not to mention spirits that are like, we've just sailed this around the equator and sailed it back, like just to further quintuple our carbon footprint. But so it goes. So this product then would offload in Sweden. They get filled with 40% vodka and 60% water. Then they get picked, packed, and palletized into cardboard boxes. That gets wrapped in lots of cellophane and then packed into a 40-foot container that then sails or flies, depending on urgency, all the way back around to China. Then it goes to a bond warehouse, to a non-bond warehouse. Then it gets trucked into some local warehouse in Chengdu, for example. Then again, trucked and shipped until finally it arrives in some cocktail bar in Chengdu or outside of Chengdu. And then that in a nightclub, that bottle will last like 10, 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Before you
on the crush. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, before you just spanked out like a bunch of vodka sodas. And then what happens is you throw it right in the bin. Think about that whole journey, that all of those materials, all of that CO2 emission, diesel fuel, manpower,
all the heat, water, and petroleum that went into the plastic packet. Yeah, absolutely.
Just to fire out mindless round of vodka sodas and chuck it right in the bin, and then and then it goes to a landfill. In the Maldives, there is a whole island that is made of garbage where just the currents are swirling, and so just crap gets caught in this whirlpool, and it has since become literally, it's called Fushi something, and it is a actual island that's made of just garbage. And it's amazing to see. And this garbage, like, there's not people in the Maldives who are just wantonly using tens of thousands of glass bottles. This all comes from the hospitality industry. It comes from tourism. It comes from hotels. It comes from all this. So this is true. So what we did is we looked at it and said, actually, when you break down the price that is charged for a bottle of, we're talking like big brand spirits, so like a bottle of Beefeater or whatever, something like 70% of that product is packaging and logistics. Only about 30% of what you're paying is for the liquid inside of the bottle. Okay. So that means that if you were to get rid of that packaging and logistics, you could save 70% of the cost of that product and potentially pass savings onto bars and things. So what we did is we said, this is a innovation that is important for the environment, obviously, but also important for craft spirits. Where craft spirits can't compete is in these massive scaled ventures of, producing millions of bottles a year. Obviously, you're getting cheaper glass, you're getting cheaper shipping contracts, you own the entire chain from, you're like Standard Oil. You own the distillery, you own the shipping line, you own the distributors, you've squeezed every possible cent that you can out of this distribution chain.
And what you've saved, you put it into marketing, and then you get what's left over. Yeah.
Well, in order to, how to say this, but if you were to compare the liquid quality of craft spirit versus the liquid quality of most majors spirit, you can't justify the price that's paid, especially if it's a blended whiskey. You can't justify the price paid except outside of the marketing campaign. It's the same thing with beer, right? If you compare the quality of craft brew versus the quality of some, mass-produced beer, it's night and day, obviously. But of course, because they don't have a scaled production or scaled distribution, the craft brew there's no way that you could possibly keep up with that price point. Or also the majors will be able to pressure the final, sales points so they can muscle better shelving space or, gondola ends or shelf talkers or poppers or any kind of this jargon that you'll hear people talk about if they do off-trade distribution. And that's just through total muscle, right? They say, give me an extra shelf because I'm really big and I do X amount of business with you, and you sign these cash contracts every year. So, and that's I'm not saying that they're the evil empire, but this is just kind of how it plays out.
I mean, it kind of begs the question, how did those companies, those big established 5, 6 companies that are global conglomerates, allow Proof and Co to come in there and disrupt like this? But I mean, I'm serious, because it's like, you guys are tiny but mighty.
Twisting my mustache. Well, it's.
I mean, it's also. I mean, I want to get back to the eco packaging, but it's like you guys brought in things like you kind of created this push, but was there a pull there? And if there wasn't, did you have to create it? Did you have to tell people what chartreuse was?
Well, I mean, Paul, our CEO, has just done a really great podcast with April Wachtel in Movers and Shakers, and I really recommend. It is required listening for anyone who wants to understand the transformation and growth of Asia's bar scene in the last 8 years. So I would recommend to start there. I won't recap what he's already said about our journey, but I mean, originally we did have to teach everything from A to Z, and it still is the case in new markets that we're still doing that genuinely frontier distribution and education and building an industry, although it's easier with social media and people can see global examples. And so it's different than it would have been, let's say, 10 years ago. But I mean, the pull from the market is that people are naturally, when you do a taste test with an account or with a global hotel chain, they're happy to pour quality spirit. They're happy to work with an independent brand, and it still is family owned or whatever's the story. They're happy to work with, someone like, for example, Plantation, who Alexandre, the owner of the company, will personally come to your market once a year. That doesn't happen with global conglomerates. Like the head guy of, behind Louis XIII he's just not coming out to personally shake your hand for pouring his product at your Ritz-Carlton. That's just not happening. And
I don't know how that guy does it. He's just made out of energy.
He's amazing. But it's obviously they can do that from a different scale, but also they can do that. It's just a different culture. So I think accounts are very naturally happy to engage with those kinds of brands and those kinds of stories and those kinds of products. And so are the guests. The guests who come to the bar are really happy when they're paying to stay at a 5-star hotel and, they order old fashioned, and then out of the well comes, Michter's or some quality American whiskey versus some big brand thing that they have seen in every corner dive, right? There's a real mismatch of quality and perception of quality versus the saturation that the big brands currently see. And again, obviously they work hard. Obviously they, this isn't me fighting the evil empire here. They're good people and they make products, but this is just the reality that we find ourselves in. So anyway, so what we've done to bring it all back is we now are creating this innovation called Eco Spirits. So what we do with Eco Spirits is it's a 4.5 liter anodized aluminum tote. It's called an Eco Tote. And this gets delivered to your bar. And it is full of, in this case, Plantation rum. So Plantation 3-star rum. So that means that we have a bottling facility in your city. It is made to be a closed loop within a city. So there is a bottling plant in that city that then takes in a bulk shipment of Plantation 3-star in this case.
In one of those large shipping totes?
Sure, 1,000 liters. In this way, we're able to eliminate 99% of all single-use packaging. So instead of that whole bottles journey with all of the cardboard and plastic and big shipping containers, not to mention the fact that all of that glass is weighing down the boats and increasing the cost of energy and decreasing the efficiency per cubed meter of liquid because you've got air and glass and things in between each of those bottles plus cardboard. So that doesn't exist in this case. So now you've got this very consolidated 1,000 liter that can then just stack, and you can pack 40 times more volume into one shipping container. That will come out. One of those 1,000 liter chunks will then come to Chengdu in this case, in our example of our bottle of Swedish vodka, goes to Chengdu. That then gets broken into 4.5 liter totes. Those totes then go to the bar, who have the option of either we have a spout that goes onto the top and you just push a button and then 45 mil comes right out. So for your bar back or server or something, if they're making vodka sodas, they can just go back there and hit the button and then it just goes out the perfect amount into their glass and then they can just move on. So you're, streamlining already. Or if you're batching, you're just pouring. So imagine every time you've batched cocktails and there's like a whole bunch of dead glass and like that never was even seen by a customer, right? They've never even seen your brand because it just went straight into a batch bucket, and that's just total dead waste. Or if you are able to, if you're in a market that allows you to do bottle refilling for spirits, then you just refill, you can take your plantation bottle that you already have, that's perfectly fine, and just refill it. And then when this is empty, just like a keg of beer, this 4.5 liter, the truck comes back around, drops off your new totes, picks up your old ones. The old ones go back to the plant. They get sterilized and washed and then refilled with 3-star for the next person. So one of these totes will make like 1,000 trips inside of the same city and will save, 1,000 times 6,000 glass bottles in its life cycle. Plus the only thing that you need to make that international shipment, forget the pallets, forget the plastic, is just one little A4 piece of paper that says where it's going. So it's pretty cool.
That's incredible. I'm just like picturing the U.S. senator from Kentucky whose eyes are rolling all the way through the back of his head and down the street behind him, imagining that liquor would come in any one of the approved sizes that there are now. I think it's like 50 mils, 200 mils, 750s, thousands, and 1.75s.
What's funny is when you read old cocktail books and old literature, what we see if you're looking at like Harry Johnson or one of these guys' old cocktail books is they talk about the duties and responsibilities of the bartender opening and closing the bar back in like the 1860s or whatever. And one of the responsibilities you have is at the end of the day, you take your very precious glass bottle that is hand blown and is very fancy and will last you a lifetime. Glass is supposed to last a lifetime. And you would take it down to the basement where you have your barrels of Jamaican rum and cognac and whatever, and you would fill it and take it back upstairs. Like, this is how this industry used to be operated. What we've found is in our research that during the industrialization of the States, especially during the World Wars, and especially right after the World Wars, where a lot of that wartime capacity was no longer needed, a lot of unions, especially the glass blowing union, started getting very nervous that, man, we just really increased our capacity for glass bottles to service wartime efforts, to ship medicines and all this kind of thing. And I'm just really worried that people are going to be like, they're just going to stop buying glass. Like, people have for their entire lives been washing and recycling these glass bottles because that's the original intention of glass. And we have too much capacity. So they started distributing flyers to all of their union members that after you finish using a glass bottle, to save you and your friends' jobs, you should break that bottle. And this became the practice of, tens of thousands of people, is you would use a bottle and you'd break it to preserve you and your friends' jobs. And the flyers are pretty crazy if you take a look at them. So
that's madness.
It is crazy, but this is the kind of thinking that you see pervading in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s America, right? Which is supermarket culture, suburban culture, this
powdered whiskey sours.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's all of these wartime innovations that then had to find homes in suburban life because we had created all of this capacity and all of these products and innovations, canned, we have to use all the canned foods. So then you've got like using cream of mushroom soup as the base for your Sunday night roast or whatever. And so that's the innovations that you see in post-World War II United States, is how do we use this capacity and how do we protect all of these new centers for industrialization that we've created? Do we export? Can we consume them at home? So all this kind of stuff. So this is the kind of thinking that has gotten us into the problems that we're facing in 2020 of like everyone is just used to single use everything, not thinking about the landfill, using the plastic straws, never mind the turtles, like all of this. And we're seeing the flashback. So if you think that this problem starts and stops at plastic straws, you're just not thinking hard enough or critically enough about the problems. So the fact of the matter is that this is where our whole society is going, is in the direction of reusable products, and not because it's trendy, but eventually out of a necessity. We can't continue this unsustainable path. And our clients really recognize this. So when we start distributing eco spirits in our markets, it's now in Australia, it's now all over Asia Pacific, we're launching it very shortly in China. People are so excited to have a product like this that says, the whole system's carbon audited. We have a tree planting program for all of the totes. So like the distributor in Chengdu can go and see how many trees he has planted just from his own actions, which means that like there's some piece of forest in Borneo that is like the Chengdu Eco Spirits forest. It's all, the whole program is pays into a carbon audit and a carbon credit so that it's carbon neutral. Like this is pretty amazing, and clients and hotels and bars are really proud to, just like everyone jumped off of the plastic straw bandwagon once our eyes were open and we realized that we're being ridiculous. It's not dissimilar. So once you separate people from this 70-year fever dream of single-use glass, it becomes a really obvious thing. Like, oh yeah, you're right. Glass is like, these bottles are really nice, and it's a little silly to be, just throwing them away. Like a bottle of Michter's is a beautiful, like that's a nice bottle, right? So why wouldn't you just wash that out and reuse it? So, or in the case of alcohol, it's self-sterilizing. So it's like, just, it's been eye-opening for me to be here on the pointy end of the spear and seeing people realize in real time, like how many bottles, like there's one account in Singapore that redid one major cocktail change and turned it over to eco spirits. And I think they're saving like 40,000 glass bottles a year just from that one change alone. Just think about all that glass, right? 10 years, it's 400,000 bottles.
I'm definitely thinking about it. It's I think it's circling around Thila Fushi. Is that the name of the island in the Maldives?
Oh yeah,
Thila
yeah,
Fushi.
Yeah.
And I see like Ariel, the little mermaid, kind of dancing around, playing with them, just kind of pondering what it would like to be dancing with the human man. Anyways, Chris, this has been absolutely enlightening. I mean, I really did not. This is better than any class that I've ever taken in any school ever. Just hearing you talk about this stuff has been very, very fascinating. And I really like hearing you talk.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I know you woke up really early to come and do this, but thank you so much for doing that.
No, all good. It's always a pleasure to, first of all, to chat with an old friend. So that's great. And I'm heading, speaking of which, I'm going in a couple minutes to our Eco Spirits bottling plant here. So maybe I'll post some photos and show all of that. But hey, like there's always interesting stuff happening in China. So if let's see what people think, and maybe we'll make part 2 to this dialogue at some point in time.
Yeah, I would love to get us. I know we're at A or B right now. I'd love to get closer to D, E, or F because it just seems fascinating. Like we think we're so advanced, we think we're so cool over here, but we really just choose not to see what is really out there.
there's always an opportunity to learn. And I never mean to come off like China's got it made or China is 100% the future. Like, the fact is that these markets, it used to be the case that you could look at a market like Paris versus a market like London in terms of cocktail culture and say, oh, they're at the speakeasy phase. I'm sure that after the speakeasy phase will come era in which consumers are more enlightened by about beverage, and then they're going to want hospitality, and then they're going to be in the, take away the garnishes and just serve really naked, straightforward cocktails, but with elevated hospitality. And then it moves from that to, it used to be a very linear progression between cocktail markets. So you could look at, something like San Antonio, for example, and say, oh, like, you're at this stage of New York's timeline. And so the next three predictable steps are A, B, and C. But the fact is that, and that's how I used to think about it, even up to maybe 2 years ago. But what I've realized traveling around the region and doing our work with Proof, and especially watching China, who has taken this cocktail thing and just spread it into so many unforeseen and unpredictable directions, just with a lack of pretenses and an openness towards creative, nonlinear thought when it comes to business opportunities, is it's no longer the case that there's a linear timeline for a cocktail culture's development. Now it is kind of spiraling out in this kind of fractal pattern where, you're looking at something in China that has, I used to be able to go to the bars in China and say, oh, this is kind of like a Dead Rabbit, or, oh, this cocktail scene is kind of similar to a Chicago, or, oh, I get what this bar is doing. They're like PDT or the Nomad or something. But now I'm going to openings in China that have absolutely there's no contemporary concept of a sister bar somewhere else in the world. Like, the people who are opening bars in China now are inspired by people who were inspired by people who were inspired by people who were inspired by something Western. So It has now gone through so many local cultural iterations and so many transitions that are completely independent of Western precedent and Western thought, that there's a tremendous amount that you can learn. It's no longer true that, like, once you've been to New York, you've kind of seen it all, or London or whatever. Now it is like you can go around the world regardless of where you're from, and you can learn a tremendous amount in terms of different ways of doing business or different ways of positioning your cocktail bar. Like, I could go on for the next 3 hours with fascinating stories about business models in the cocktail market that literally don't exist anywhere else. And
it's like, it seems like as the generations are removed from their, perceived origins in the West, like as in, like we, in New York in our time, it's like you could probably trace every bar some sort of line back to like Pegu Club, employees only, or Milk and Honey. But as the lines get blurred from generation to generation, like they kind of, like I would hope that they would become kind of more products of necessity and or like physical representations of the personalities of the proprietors. Like they become like the
unique time circumstances and opportunities that were around that person when they made those business decisions. So like I've been posting the last couple of days about cocktail delivery kit, door-to-door cocktail deliveries in China, which is a huge thing. And there's at least 100 bars that are doing this right now in China. And there's also an app in China called Redbook where it's almost like QVC plus Instagram Live. So you can live cast to your audience who then tunes in. And because your banking in China is seamlessly linked with all of your other apps. So
with WeChat?
Yes, exactly. So I get a push notification that, oh, so-and-so, the cocktail blogger that you follow is doing a live stream. I tune in. He's doing a live stream together with the head bartender from some bar, and they're on there together selling talking about like the cocktail delivery kit that bar is doing, and then people can click through and purchase, and they do an automatic revenue share between those two people, so.
And they can get that on demand? Like that will be
delivered to their door, if not in 30 minutes, then at least next day. And so no matter where they are in the country, which is amazing. I mean, the logistics, so you've got logistics systems that don't exist in the States. You've got technologies that don't exist in the States. You've got business models that don't exist in the States. And so when you combine all these things and factor all these things, it creates an environment in which businesses that frankly can't exist in the States can flourish, which if it's not the future, then it's at least informative about some direction. Maybe you take some piece of that and apply it to your next concept, and apply it to what you're thinking about next. So I just say all this to say there's always fascinating stuff to learn about, and I'm happy to share it. So anyway, we talk again soon.
Yeah, man. Yes, we are. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time, and I hope to speak with you very soon. It
is always a treat. Anyone who wants to learn more about Eco Spirits, please give it a Google. And it is also, I just don't want to get it is ecospirits.global is the website. So all that information's up there. Drink Magazine did a really cool article if you want to learn more. But hey, Jason, it's always a pleasure, man. And let's not make it too long before the next time we catch up.
Thanks, buddy. I hope you enjoyed this episode sitting down with Chris Lowder from Proof & Co. in China. Be sure to check out the show notes for a brief summary of the show, and a special thanks to Danny Messina for editing and post-producing the show. I want to keep these shows as short as possible, but I don't edit Chris Lowder. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas, please be sure to reach out to me at Jason Littrell on Twitter and Instagram, or search for Jason Littrell on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you got anything out of our time together, you can thank me by simply sharing this with another person. If you love the show, please hit the subscribe button, leave a rating and review, or comment on iTunes or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. We're on Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, we're on all of them. So again, hope to see you next time, and be well.